Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School. Like I was PTSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. During the final episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, Obi-Wan bested his former student once again. What would have happened had Obi-Wan gone against the Jedi way and killed his former student, ending the legacy of Darth Vader? Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else a part of the Pente Patrol team. If you want a chance to win in our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video, and I'll tell you how. Our story begins on a moon, dark, very dark and distraught, just like the mind of Obi-Wan Kenobi's former student, Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan knew who was under the suit, the machine by the name of Darth Vader. Though Obi-Wan knew what he had to do, did he have the strength to do it? That was undetermined, but Obi-Wan looked across the way as Vader walked out of his shuttle, his dark robes fluttering behind him as Obi-Wan looked at Vader. The tension of Mustafar and Mapuzo had boiled, and it was just like both times. Now it was between Obi-Wan and Vader to decide who the victor would be after the two encounters with one another. Vader stepped out and stopped. A million emotions floated through his mind. Rage, pain, suffering, everything that had become of him in the years since his descent into Darth Vader. Could he blame Obi-Wan for this? Yes. But would he also blame Anakin Skywalker? Of course he would. Vader, to an extent, both blamed Obi-Wan and Anakin, because Obi-Wan bested him, and Anakin Skywalker was too weak. It was as both Anakin and Vader were two separate personalities. Vader looked across the way and asked if Obi-Wan had come to destroy him. Obi-Wan looked at Vader. He paused momentarily. He was back on Mustafar, looking at the long curly hair of his former student as he looked across, and then at the metallic beast he turned his former student into, as the words came out of his mouth that he will do what he must, just like he did on Mustafar. Obi-Wan moved his blade around into his traditional Form 3 Soriso form, as he held his blue blade above his head. Vader was quick to rebuttal that Obi-Wan was going to die. Red illuminated from the side of Vader's torso as he prepared to fight his former master one last time. This battle was for everything. Vader could have killed Obi-Wan on Mapuzo, but that was too easy. Vader wanted the pleasure of killing Obi-Wan at his best, and apparently this was his best. Obi-Wan had returned to the muscle memory he had when he was a high-ranking member of the Jedi Order. He had no fear as his lightsaber whipped around and around as he clashed with Vader. The Dark Lord of the Sith hit like a crate dragon, but it didn't stop Obi-Wan from reciprocating each and every single blow with the impulse and strength of a true Jedi Master. This was the Obi-Wan that Vader wanted to beat. On Mapuzo, Kenobi was just a hermit, the shell of a Jedi who he once was. Obi-Wan was once the master of Form 3, and he had no strength. It was obvious to Vader that Kenobi's strength had returned. The two bounced back and forth as their lightsabers clashed with one another. Obi-Wan using Vader's lack of mobility to his advantage as he rolled around the Dark Lord, swinging whenever and wherever he had the opportunity to do so. Kenobi was strong with the Force, and he made it ever so apparent to Vader that this would be his hardest fight he'd ever been a part of since Mustafar. Obi-Wan toiled back and forth as their duel progressed through the rocky terrain. It would lead Vader taking on advantage from Obi-Wan as he opened up a chasm under Obi-Wan's feet and dropped him down several feet below the surface. Kenobi looked up, recognizing the difference in ground. Obi-Wan knew the key to the high ground was having the low ground. It worked on Maul and it worked on Anakin almost 10 years beforehand. Obi-Wan waited patiently. He knew Anakin was impatient, and he knew Vader would be the exact same way. And instead of taunting his former master, Vader began throwing boulders at Obi-Wan, burying him under tons and tons of rocks and boulders. Obi-Wan was seemingly buried under the boulders with no possible means to escape. Vader knew Obi-Wan wasn't powerful enough to escape this, and just left him below the rubble to suffocate, alone. Just like Vader did on Mustafar until he was rescued by his master. But Vader knew that no Jedi would come to save Kenobi. Just the thought of letting Obi-Wan suffocate alone was almost joyful. This victor in Vader's mind was one as he stepped away, and he was one more step towards killing Anakin Skywalker once and for all. Vader turned away as he muttered the words under his mouth that his master would never, ever hear. As he walked back to his shuttle, Vader's thoughts focused on the past. As he walked away, as if he himself stood in his own mind, cutting down every memory he had of Obi-Wan, as he killed them all within that death trap of a mind he had. Under the rubble, a hand stood above the body of a man, who had his eyes closed, not dead, but very much alive. Obi-Wan felt the Force flow through him. He had lost his connection with the Force since Mustafar. He thought about the Force, but when you're a hermit on Tatooine, the two suns begin to drain you more than the weight of the dark side that it had on the galaxy. The evil shroud of darkness dimmed any light, and even worse, he was never allowed to train Luke. It was torture for Obi-Wan. He couldn't uphold his mandate, as he watched Luke turn into the same boy that Anakin was as a child on Tatooine. Obi-Wan reflected on everything as he grunted, holding each and every boulder above his head, thousands upon thousands of pounds of weight. Obi-Wan then began thinking of Leia, and how she inspired him to be a Jedi again, and how the children of Anakin, both Luke and Leia, made him want to fight for them. Obi-Wan was already worried about the third sister finding Luke. He had felt it through the Force, that she found the communication that Bail Organa left for him. Obi-Wan's mind ran rampant. Everything Vader said to him on Mustafar, Mapuzo, and even here on this moon, it echoed through his mind, and then Obi-Wan found himself at peace. He heard the teachings of Qui-Gon that was taught to him as a boy, and then he heard the love that Satine gave him as a man, to the bond that he found in all of his friends, and finally, he found the connection and inspiration from the children of Anakin. For the first time for Obi-Wan, he felt a new connection with the Force. He felt power in his hands, and he felt the true calling and will of the Force. He wasn't just a user of the Force, but he was a part of the Force, something that Plo Koon talked about with him once a long time ago. It was just as he described it. Power flowed out of his hands as he shot thousands of pounds with boulders off of him as he ran up the steep incline and leaped up, using the Force to guide him to the top. Obi-Wan began running. He could hear the breathing of Vader from the silence of the darkened abyss. Obi-Wan saw the dark creature walking past rocks and boulders and formations. He stopped, just in time to defend himself from Kenobi. Vader ignited his lightsaber and blocked Obi-Wan's attempt. Their blades clashed with one another. Vader was a very forward and aggressive attacker. He hadn't been put on defense since a duel with Dooku. For the first time in a decade, Vader found himself on the back pedal, moving away from Kenobi's blade as Obi-Wan took the mantle of his master's lightsaber form, using a Taro to throw the Sith Lord off balance. Vader reciprocated Obi-Wan's strikes well, and then out of nowhere, Vader was sent flying. This power, it wasn't Obi-Wan. This was the power of Windu, or Yoda, or Plo, or Sidious. This was not Obi-Wan Kenobi. This was another being. It couldn't be true. Obi-Wan had never been so powerful, and Obi-Wan took full advantage of Vader's surprise. Obi-Wan knew how to beat Anakin, without even having to have his own lightsaber to do so. This was already a checkmate. Vader just didn't see it yet. As Vader looked up, after colliding hard with a rock and wall of stone, he saw the face of a confident Obi-Wan Kenobi looking at him. With his arms raised and his blade still ignited, hundreds of little pillars of solid sand formed behind Obi-Wan as he lifted into the air. This was no Jedi. This was some sort of sorcery. The Jedi weren't this powerful. Vader knew it. He'd been killing Jedi for the duration of the last decade. He never had to worry about fighting any council members other than the two known survivors, and Kenobi and Yoda. The rest of them had already been killed by this point. Of course, the unknown missing Jedi in action such as Shakti, but that wasn't any matter for him to worry about. Vader braced himself as dozens of rocks began tumbling at him, crushing into his metallic suit. Vader grunted in agony as the stone slammed into the gentle skin he had on the other side of his armor that was soft. He had very little protection in certain areas of his armor, and the rocks didn't stop coming as Vader's rage boiled. He would not lose to Kenobi again. He would not stand for this again. Vader lashed out at Obi-Wan, who moved in Suriso form again as he defended against the Sith Lord. Vader was powerful as he swung down, trying to hit Kenobi, but missing. Obi-Wan then locked hands with Vader, the two of them, brothers as always, fighting intimately as two brothers would. Their hands holding between the two of them as they slashed at each other, colliding blades. Vader wasn't prepared for this Obi-Wan Kenobi that he was fighting, as his blade flew back, almost tipping out of his hand. Kenobi then used the bottom of his blade and slammed it into the chest piece that kept all of Vader's mechanics functional. Obi-Wan was relentless, and smashed it again, harder and harder, each swing taking the breath away from the Sith Lord. Vader tumbled back as he tried to catch his breath, struggling as his cybernetics began to struggle under the pressure that Obi-Wan laid into them. A moment later, Vader viciously struck out, and Obi-Wan knew that there was no coming back for the Dark Lord. Obi-Wan struck the back of Vader as he tumbled to the ground like a child being disciplined. Vader looked over, rage beneath the mask, as he got up again, staggering to his feet. Obi-Wan was unrelenting. This vicious machine known as Darth Vader was going to die. Obi-Wan used the Force as he tossed Vader down the ways, as the Dark Lord collided with more boulders and tumbled to his knees, not ready to fail yet again. He looked up as he looked into Obi-Wan's eyes. Vader got to his feet as he prepared himself for one final attempt to kill his former master. Obi-Wan then twisted his blade around like a true master of the blade as he ran towards Vader. The Dark Lord had his opportunity as he swung and missed. But Obi-Wan, who was airborne, did not miss. as he slashed through Vader's mask, leaving an open hole in the mask of Darth Vader. Obi-Wan stepped back as a howl could be heard from Vader. The Dark Lord was on his knees as a red eminence lit his face, and then it tumbled away as Obi-Wan looked directly into the eye of Anakin Skywalker. The real Anakin Skywalker, as Anakin stumbled around, looking at Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan muttered his name softly. Obi-Wan looked into the eyes of Anakin and told him that he was sorry for all of it. Memories flashed into Obi-Wan's mind as everything that had happened in their past. The death of Padme, especially poignant in Obi-Wan's mind, but even more was the pain of having to abandon Anakin when he went to Utapau. Anyone else should have gone, or at the very least, Anakin should have come with Obi-Wan. Of course, the Council could have never foreseen what was about to happen, but they all failed Anakin. Anakin spoke up as his mechanics turned from Anakin to Vader, back to Anakin, as he told Obi-Wan that he was not his failure, that he didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, but instead, it was Darth Vader that did. Obi-Wan's eyes welled up with tears as he looked at Anakin, and then the blue light vanished. The tear dried on Anakin's face as Anakin vanished behind the crimson cascading across the shadow of the mask as Vader returned. Kenobi looked at Vader and then realized that Anakin had truly died. This was the end of his student. Obi-Wan knew it, and so did Vader, as he said out of his mouth, the same way that he will destroy Kenobi. Obi-Wan did say under his breath that his friend was truly gone. Vader then steadied himself to his feet as he regained the yellow touch to his eyes. As Obi-Wan lifted his blade into Form 4, just like Qui-Gon would have, Vader staggered. He said it all to bring Obi-Wan in, to make him attack, so that he could take advantage of Kenobi. Vader was manipulative. He knew how to get inside of someone's mind, and he was trying that same trick on his former master. But little did he realize that Obi-Wan was too smart to fall for that. This was the same man who watched an old rival kill the love of his life and his master without even wavering from the light. Vader knew that as Kenobi positioned himself into a defensive form, that he would have to go forward and fight him head-on. Anakin was impatient, and neither was Vader. Obi-Wan knew this. He watched Vader gasp for breath, using every bit of anger within him as he drew his blade forward. He moved and stumbled. It was too easy of a target. Obi-Wan knew not to fall for it. As Vader got closer and closer, he opened himself up for a hefty swing. Obi-Wan ducked under and threw the blade forward as he sidestepped and saw blue emanating out of Vader's back. The Sith Lord tumbled down onto his back. He looked up at the sky, alone in this dark abyss, as his pain began to seethe away. He was no longer a slave, and while he could only see it now, it was over. Obi-Wan ran over and got beneath Vader as he placed his hand under the metallic helmet of his former friend while throwing away Vader's lightsaber. Vader looked up as he reached his arm up trying to grab Obi-Wan. Kenobi used his open hand and grabbed it gently, holding it to his chest. Vader looked at Obi-Wan, a tear welling behind his eye as he tried to speak, but Obi-Wan shushed him, telling Anakin that it was time to sleep, telling Anakin that he wasn't going anywhere, also telling Anakin to think of Padme, because she would take him to a place that he always belonged. A deep breath withered out of Anakin's chest as he looked up and tilted his head closer to Obi-Wan. As his weak and fragile body grabbed a hold of Obi-Wan's hand, he felt cold. Everything was cold. But being cold was better than no longer feeling. The darkness took everything away from him, but here and now, he could feel again. Obi-Wan held Anakin's hand as he also kept Vader's helmet up. He then used the Force to give Anakin warmth. Shallow breaths could be heard echoing out across the barren landscape. Anakin's eyes filled with one more tear as he looked at Obi-Wan, with an ocean blue filling his eyes. He realized that everything he gave for nothing. The manipulation of the Sith and the fall of the Jedi, it was all for nothing. He was just a pawn, a slave if you will. He looked at Obi-Wan as a weak smile rang out across his cheek. Just like the Anakin that knew when the fun began, Obi-Wan held his tears back. He wanted Anakin to be calm in this moment. He watched as a tear dried on Anakin's face as the eyes of his friend stared blankly back at him. The grip on his hand weakened as his body began to feel heavier. Obi-Wan let a tear trickle down his face as he laid his friend to rest, closing Anakin's eye, and looking down at his apprentice. No look of resentment, no feelings of pain, but a bit of happiness. Anakin was always a slave, and though he died free of that. No longer a slave to the Sith. Obi-Wan knew that he had to make a proper burial for Anakin, so that he constructed a quick fire pit and burned the corpse of his former apprentice. Obi-Wan watched as he stood silently, holding his respects, just as he did for his master decades before on Naboo. Obi-Wan lost everyone he loved in his arms: Qui-Gon, Satine, and Anakin. Of course Obi-Wan could return to being a hermit, but he knew that it was no longer an option. There was a greater fight at hand, and if the Jedi like Quinlan Vos were still alive, keeping the fight alive, then there was a chance for the galaxy after all. Obi-Wan felt sorry that he hadn't realized that sooner, but regardless, he closed his eyes as he said one final goodbye to Anakin Skywalker and returned to his ship. He had to get back to Tatooine as soon as he could. When he arrived on Tatooine a little while later, he found the Lars homestead and landed. There was a woman outside of the homestead on her knees. Obi-Wan saw Owen and Beru carrying Luke inside of the farm, as Obi-Wan moved over to the third sister, Reva. She had intended on killing Luke, revenge against the man who killed all of her friends, her entire family inside of the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan knew that revenge was a natural instinct, but he walked over to her and placed his hand on her shoulder, a comfort from the Jedi Master who should have been there to protect the younglings. Reva had tears in her eyes, memories of her friends, the Jedi slaughtered in every hall of the Jedi Temple. When she awoke to try and sneak away from the sounds of fighting during the daytime, she could see limbs and bodies, nothing but bodies. The sun made its way through the temple where she could hear the clones fighting outside what sounded like two different Jedi on the steps of the Jedi Temple, but she ran. Reva remembered seeing familiar faces and unfamiliar ones. She remembered seeing clones with their helmets on and those without their helmets on. Reva remembered each and every face as she passed by when she escaped the Jedi Temple after Order 66, and she saw every single one of those faces on Luke when she was about to kill him. She represented these emotions and she didn't want to accept them as her own. Reva looked up at Obi-Wan with tears in her eyes. He knew. He understood. His presence was calming. She could feel that Vader was dead, and she knew that Obi-Wan did the unthinkable. He killed his own apprentice, for the galaxy to stand a chance at redemption. Everyone across the galaxy could feel it, even those who were as disconnected to the Force as Yoda. Obi-Wan knelt down next to Reva, comforting her, telling her that no matter her past, no matter the decisions she made, right or wrong, she always had the ability to right the past and do something positive with the future. Reva asked Obi-Wan if he would guide her to a better future, if he could teach her how to find balance and how to resolve in the Force. She wanted to be better, she wanted to be a real Jedi, and she aspired to right the wrongs of the past that she was trying to leave behind. Obi-Wan looked at her in the eyes, and then he looked back to the homestead. Obi-Wan knew that Owen would never let him train Luke after this. Of course, it would be for the betterment of the galaxy if he could train Luke or Leia, but the chances of Bail or Owen giving up either of their adopted children were unlikely. Owen was the least likely of the two, a brute of a man, even after Obi-Wan was the one that gifted him their adopted child. Bail, on the other hand, might give it a chance, especially since Leia returned home and began talking about her crusade with this Jedi named Ben Kenobi. She adored him and wished she could spend more time around him, but Obi-Wan didn't want to impede. Yet, Reva looked at Obi-Wan and watched the gears turn in his mind. She thought he would stay on Tatooine, but then he said that it was time that the Jedi returned. He was wrong to tell Nari off days earlier, resulting in the death of that Jedi that had survived the Purge. Obi-Wan needed to lead the Jedi back. He looked at Reva and asked who the Inquisitors were looking for. There was a massive list. Hundreds of Jedi survived the Purge, and though Vader made his way through most of them, killing off former council members and anyone else below them, the Inquisitors were a formidable force, but they were often missing their mark when it came to being able to successfully kill a Jedi. Reva told Kenobi that there were two Jedi who broke into their Fortress Inquisitorius, mere months before he had to save the girl. Their name was Cal Kestis and Sierra Junda, but they had been missing for a good while, off the radar of some sorts. Obi-Wan knew that the few remaining council members were long dead. There was one who was missing in action, but no one knew where she went. Shakti had been off the radar for the last 10 years. Obi-Wan had no clue where to look for her. She was like a ghost, so chances of finding her would be very difficult. Then Reva said the name of Jedi Master Quinlan Vos. He had been known to escape encounters with the Imperials, and there was a good chance he could still be around to this day. Obi-Wan smiled as he helped Reva up. He told her that they would leave by the morning. Reva was very pleased to hear it, as she followed Obi-Wan back across the sand into a little cave he had up overlooking Luke's residence. When they got there, Obi-Wan got some of the few Bacta patches he had and covered Reva's lightsaber wound, as he told her to rest. There was much that needed to be done in her future. And for her redemption, there was much for her to learn. Reva would go to sleep, yet Obi-Wan would not. He would sit outside of the cave, focused and quietly sitting in his mind, as he donned the robes of the Jedi Council member that was Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was no longer afraid. He knew that if he would do this, he needed to inspire hope, and to bring about a new sense of peace that could come to the galaxy. Obi-Wan sat quietly, and then he heard a voice. The voice of someone he'd been looking for a long time. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he surpassed the greatest challenge, and asked if he was ready to lead again. Obi-Wan was confident, ready to restore hope. Qui-Gon asked that Obi-Wan remember that he will be challenged. He will find struggle to find motivation. He will have worse days than he has faced before, but he has to always remember to trust in the Force. Obi-Wan was confident that he would. A tear rolled down from Obi-Wan's eye as a smile glimmered under his beard. The suns of Tatooine eventually rose over the horizon as the face of Obi-Wan shined like a new fire of restored hope to the galaxy. Obi-Wan turned and saw Reva standing, almost entirely in awe. Obi-Wan Kenobi had returned. He was himself again. Obi-Wan lowered his robe from his head as he stood up. He looked over and asked if she was alright, to which she told him she was. The two of them would prepare for a long and arduous journey. There was a lot for them to discover, and they had to act quickly, because the path was changing ever so fast. If they could get out there to the path, they could reignite hope in the galaxy. Obi-Wan didn't need much, as he attached his lightsaber to his hilt and covered up with his robe. He looked down at the homestead, and he saw Owen outside working already. He knew it was time to leave it behind, but part of him couldn't. He wanted to train Luke so badly, and he knew that Owen was holding Luke back. Obi-Wan looked at Reva, and then down to a little chest he was going to leave behind. Inside of the chest sat something so precious to him, one of the few relics he had of his former apprentice. He opened the box and looked at the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker. Obi-Wan took it out and placed it on his belt next to his own lightsaber. He told Reva that he would be back, and then they would leave to find Roken and the rest of the people from the path, so that they could help the Jedi and the people of the galaxy rebuild and work against the Empire. That is where Reva's training would begin. She didn't notice that Obi-Wan was carrying the lightsaber of Anakin Skywalker, but she was excited. She got to train with Obi-Wan Kenobi, but there was of course the hesitance of it. She was afraid of him failing her, or abandoning her, just like anybody else had. She had a lot of trauma to overcome. All the Jedi did. They all struggled with life after Order 66 ripped the Jedi Order apart. Reva waited as she looked out across the seas of sand and saw Obi-Wan talking to Owen. Kenobi made a case to Owen, and he seemed flustered, but as he turned and looked at the boy, Luke wasn't working. He was using a wrench and flying it around like he was piloting through Beggar's Canyon. Beru walked out of the homestead and she knew. She knew that they couldn't hold Luke back forever. He was his father's son, not Owen's. Of course, Owen would need help as he got older, but he had time to save to hire help. Beru walked over and asked Luke to come over and meet someone. Beru told Luke that this was Obi-Wan Kenobi, as Obi-Wan knelt down and let out a gentle, "Hello there." Luke smiled awkwardly as he looked at the bearded man wearing some sort of robes. Beru told Luke that he'd be going with old Obi-Wan to learn about the life of his father and learn about the natural affinity that laid within him. Luke didn't understand, but he did walk over. Obi-Wan expressed joy to meet little Luke, as Luke had the burden to question, asking if Obi-Wan knew his father. Obi-Wan just smiled and asked the boy to come along. They had a long road ahead of them. Obi-Wan walked with Luke behind him. The boy always wanted adventure. Without ever meeting his father, he was quite literally the clone of Anakin Skywalker. Ambitious, eager, excited, always ready for something new. And while Luke never had the trouble of being a slave, he never really much liked being a farmer. Anakin would have never wanted that from him anyways. The two would walk across the desert and walk into Reva. Luke wasn't frightened by her. While he caught glimpses of the person who chased him out of this house last night, he never saw her face. He just saw the shadow of someone chasing him. Reva now donned the gray Jedi robes that Obi-Wan had been wearing in the previous days. She now looked like part of the Jedi, and while she wasn't completely ready to accept this way of life, she had a lot of change she needed to work on, internally and externally, before she could become a Jedi once again. The first would be resolving the bleeding done to her kyber crystal. Obi-Wan hadn't sold the ship yet, so he and Reva took Luke aboard, and Reva felt instantaneously guilty for what she put Luke through, but the boy didn't seem to be bothered by her. She thought that he was fearless, but She came to realize that he never really truly saw her face, and he had no reason to associate fear with her. Reva sat quietly, biting her lip raw and grinding her teeth. Obi-Wan could sense the tension in her, so he got up and sat down next to her, and told her that the best path forward was forgiveness. She needed to learn to forgive, not Anakin, not Obi-Wan, but she needed to forgive herself. There was nothing at her fault. She and all of her friends were punished because of something outside of their control. The council should have been better, and she put too much blame on herself for what happened to the Jedi Order and to her friends inside of the Jedi Temple during Operation Nightfall. Reva kept looking at Anakin's lightsaber as she felt the memories of everything Anakin did to her, and her brethren coursed throughout her mind. Obi-Wan took the lightsaber off his hilt and asked her to hold it. Obi-Wan knew this would be difficult for her to do, but he believed if she trusted herself to hold it, then she could trust herself to be able to forgive herself for something that she didn't do. Reva held it as tears rolled down her eyes, covering the lightsaber hilt with the tears of 100 younglings. The terror they all felt was present on this lightsaber that slayed them all. They were gone, but their memory would live on forever. Obi-Wan pulled the ship out of hyperspace as he landed down onto a large landing bay. He walked out and found his old friend, Bail Organa, to be waiting. Bail's wife and adopted daughter hadn't made their way out yet. Obi-Wan walked over to Bail, as Bail noticed how striking Obi-Wan looked in his Jedi attire. Obi-Wan told Bail that he was joining the cause again, and he wanted to train the children. Bail's face lit with confusion, but also a bit of sadness. He adored his daughter. Their striking relationship was something he always adored. Obi-Wan told him that he had the son, and he wanted to train them both together. It'd be a sin not to. Obi-Wan then confessed to having killed their father, and he knew it would be a matter of time before the Emperor started scouring the galaxy for the children of the Force, eventually finding one to call his own apprentice. Bail knew Obi-Wan was right, and as much as he and his wife loved Leia, they needed to let her become a Jedi. The question was if Leia was ready to become a Jedi or not. Leia came out of the building and saw Kenobi as she ran up to him and gave him the biggest hug. She was so excited to see him, fearing that she would never see the aging old, tired man again, the one who saved her life. Leia suggested that it was time for him to take a nap, and Obi-Wan laughed it off as he saw Bail and his wife talking in the background. Obi-Wan asked Leia if she remembered what he told her on Mapuzo. She nodded her head, and then he said that he wanted her to meet someone. She looked up at the ship and saw a young boy, about the same age as her. He was staring at the massive cities and the incredible amounts of green. He'd never seen so much green before. There wasn't as much green on all of Tatooine as there were on the landing platform, let alone in the city and the mass of mountains outside. Obi-Wan looked over and told Leia that that boy over there was her twin brother. Leia looked at Obi-Wan with a confused face as her jaw dropped to the ground. Obi-Wan told her that she could meet him if she wanted. Part of Leia was quite excited for this. She had a brother this entire time. Being an only child got boring and her friends weren't always available to hang out with her, especially because she was the Princess of Alderaan. There was always a lot of information for Leia to digest as she looked at Obi-Wan and said that she knew there was more. Obi-Wan smiled. She was so intuitive. She could read him just like a book, and even after days that they spent together, Obi-Wan knew he couldn't lie. So he asked if she was ready for another adventure. She looked at him and then back to her parents, who both smiled at her. Was she ready for another adventure? Not even Leia knew, but her parents waved her on. She knew that only she could do it if she wanted to. Leia then nodded her head and walked up the steps, into the ship, and into the bay area where she saw Reva. Leia immediately freaked out as she grabbed Obi-Wan's hand. Obi-Wan explained to Leia that sometimes people make mistakes, and that though their mistakes may hurt us, we must always forgive them. Leia looked at Reva, who bit her lip nervously. She was stressed out of her mind. She felt so bad what she did to the children, only to realize that they were both Anakins. Obi-Wan headed to the cockpit of the ship and took off into the air. As he took it off away, the ship had a homing beacon to Banab. So, Kenobi knew he needed to go there to find Roken, maybe even Haja. But most importantly, the seeds of hope that he would have to restore to the galaxy. There would be fear bringing someone like Reva to one of these planets, but the truth was that this was Obi-Wan Kenobi. One of the poster boys of the former Republic, he was one of the most well-known Jedi of his era, and his name still meant something to the people of the galaxy. For Jedi who might see this, Jedi might be inspired to join the cause. Obi-Wan knew his name had a meaning, and instead of being called Ben, he would revert to his real name, Obi-Wan. When Obi-Wan landed on the planet, he remembered it from the Clone Wars. Leia's droids had been here before. They had a mission here, and C-3PO never stopped talking about it. The civilization here had grown since the Clone Wars, but it was relatively rudimentary. Regardless, the path was here, and so was Roken. Word hadn't made it out this far yet that Vader had died. Not even the Emperor knew. His body was burned and nobody was able to find him. Sidious assumed that he was dead, but it was hard to tell. Maybe as if he was captured by Kenobi. But regardless, Sidious was furious. On Banab, Obi-Wan found Roken, who brought Obi-Wan over to an area where the survivors were. There was someone Roken wanted Kenobi to talk to, and when Obi-Wan saw the back of the man, he knew exactly who it was. It was too good to be true. The outfit, the tattoos, and the dreadlocks. And it all told him that it was Quinlan Vos. Quinlan was so excited to see him. There was so much the two of them had to catch up on, and Quinlan had to inform Kenobi that there were bunches of Jedi scoured throughout the galaxy, and he wanted to know if they could gather them. And then Quinlan noticed something. The two children, who were they? Obi-Wan just nodded his head, as Obi-Wan always would. Quinlan shook his head as if he knew that Obi-Wan was going to be the one to train him, and he wished him luck. Of course, Obi-Wan would need help for this task. Training the children wouldn't be easy, but he had to be the one to do it. No one else should. He was the one who trained their father, and he should be the one to train them. This time, he would train them right. He knew what he was going to do for the children. As he waved to Quinlan goodbye, as the wild Jedi Master disappeared into the crowd of people, Obi-Wan smiled as he turned around and looked at Luke and Leia, who were still getting acquainted with one another. They had a lot to learn regarding their lineage, but first they had to learn about each other. Reva followed the two of them closely as she listened to their conversation to one another. Kids being kids, enjoying each other's company, talking to each other. It was a great sight to Obi-Wan. Seeing the children of Skywalker being around each other and seeing someone he saved from the dark side of the Force was immeasurably motivating. There was hope in the galaxy. He just needed to keep it going, pushing it further, and hoping that people of the galaxy would reciprocate it. Obi-Wan would take the children under his arms and lead them up, with Reva to train them on a small hill. Quinlan would catch eye as he saw Kenobi do this. Obi-Wan would seat the three down on top of the hill. Obi-Wan would then show them how the Force worked. For Reva, this was extremely basic. She had gone toe-to-toe with Vader, the Grand Inquisitor, and of course a multitude of Jedi, one including Obi-Wan himself. She knew how the Force worked, which was exactly why she needed to be here for this lesson. She needed to understand the purpose of the Force, so they began. Luke and Leia had a lot to learn, but their lineage was powerful, and there was a lot that they could obtain if they used the Force correctly and if they trusted what Obi-Wan had to say to them. Obi-Wan was filling the role that Yoda left behind. Obi-Wan couldn't do much other than that. He was now essentially the Grand Master. Everyone looked up to the hill. Everyone looked up to him. He had a presence unlike any other Jedi who made their way through this world. Many of the Jedi who were present with Quinlan looked up in awe as they looked at Obi-Wan Kenobi instructing. It was a miracle. One of the most well-known Jedi was back, and that meant the Order was back. Word would travel through the path. Obi-Wan Kenobi was back, and he was leading, he was teaching, he was aspiring hope among those who had none. He was the gift of the Order, the gift of hope, and while there was no more Vader, there were the Inquisitors, and they now feared. Vader abused them, but if Vader could be beat by Kenobi, who could beat Kenobi? All the Inquisitors were former Jedi, they all knew him, they all saw him, and now the galaxy would look to him, in its darkest hour. Without knowledge of where he was, they would be looking around every corner for the Jedi Master. With the news of the legendary Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi returning, reaching the far reaches of space on the galactic map, Jedi sightings became more and more common. Uprisings against the Empire would become more and more sporadic. Saw Gerrera and his band of terrorists would see the good of Kenobi's hope, and they would change their ways to be less aggressive and take into account the public view of their actions, and how the public would perceive their agenda, remembering back to the lessons he and his sister were taught during the Clone Wars. The path would become more grander as Jedi from all across the galaxy would find their way to Banab, each and every single one of them giving their respect and kindness to Kenobi. They saw Obi-Wan as their savior to their struggles. Of course, Obi-Wan realized his position in all of this. He was becoming more than a man. He was becoming mythology. Word of him would spread as a legend would. On an operation with Quinlan Vos off-world, he and Vos would face down an Imperial army, trapped protecting a group of slaves and freeing them from their cells. Vos and Kenobi were faced with rudimentary models of AT-ATs, and when the Imperial army surrounded the two Jedi, they destroyed every vehicle and disarmed every trooper, without harming or killing a single man. Or, so said the myth. but fear of Obi-Wan would travel through the Imperial ranks, forcing some of the Inquisitors to jump ship, in fear of running into him. The Inquisitors weren't hard to motivate. If they feared an outcome, they would flee to what appeared to be the winning side. While Luke and Leia would get used to the constant relocating, and even worse than that, dealing with a Jedi Master who would be called to action every so often, they would grow incredibly well. Obi-Wan was an experienced teacher, and an experienced teacher knew how to learn from those he was training and teaching. Because of their exceptional skill, they would progress faster than Reva. And while this was disheartening for Reva, to handle that two 9-year-old, 10-year-old children were leagues more advanced than her, she understood that their lineage and who they came from. Luke and Leia also handled the story of their father really well, especially because Obi-Wan twisted the truth only a little, so that they would not resent their father. They were told that Anakin died in Obi-Wan's arms, after Vader was both slain by the two Jedi, Anakin and Obi-Wan. They saw Anakin as a hero for helping Obi-Wan kill Vader, but little did they realize that Anakin was inside the suit when Kenobi beat him in the duel. Obi-Wan would also take the twins and Reva off-world. Because of the influx of Jedi returning, it inspired Obi-Wan. He needed to make sure that the Grand Inquisitor, or Sidious, didn't find the twins. Obi-Wan moved from planet to planet after the first year of time on Banab. On each planet, Luke and Leia would have a new lesson, and Reva would learn more about the Force and the ways of the Jedi. Reva became extremely invested in the history and knowledge of the Order itself. She found herself her own little purpose in studying the documents of the Jedi and discussing their meanings with Obi-Wan. While Obi-Wan would often be referred to by other Jedi as the Grand Master, he never accepted the role, because Yoda never passed it down to him. Of course, he could visit Yoda and trouble him, but Obi-Wan knew that if Yoda wanted to return, he would. Obi-Wan, Luke, Leia, and Reva would travel to Tatooine, Ahch-To, Batuu, Telos 4, Taris, Lothal, and at the very end of their journey, after a full year of travel, aid, and courage, the five would find themselves on Illum. On their voyages, Obi-Wan showed Luke, Leia, and Reva first-hand experience of giving hope to others. While they had plenty to learn from back on Banab, they found a new sense of excitement in their travels. They would aid people, free slaves, feed the hungry, and dispatch aggressive units of Imperials. Sometimes they would run into other Jedi. On Batuu, Obi-Wan ran into a Jedi by the name of Kyle Katarn. He was there on a personal mission, something about finding a holocron for a specific lesson he was trying to teach himself. Obi-Wan taught Kyle the lesson and informed him of the path that went through Banab. On Telos 4, Obi-Wan would inspire a group of former Padawans to join the path, and the Padawans would follow Kenobi and the group to Lothal, where they would find passageway to Banab, and join the ranks of the path. Though on Lothal, Obi-Wan would adopt another apprentice, the 12-year-old Ezra Bridger. While having 4 Padawans, essentially, would be testing to even Kenobi, he bonded extremely well with each and every single one of his students. Each of his students respected him and looked up to him. There was no ego battle like there was with Anakin. Each student understood their place, and were receptive and attentive to Obi-Wan's teachings. Though Obi-Wan would emphasize a change from the code, inspired by a relatable experience he shared with an old friend. One of the few times Obi-Wan and Quinlan talked, they talked about the women in their lives. An odd conversation with 2 Jedi, but they had the conversation anyways. Vos told Kenobi that while he might be acting as Grand Master, he wouldn't be a Jedi if they prohibited the emotions that the Old Order did. Obi-Wan would be very curious, so he prodded further. Quinlan told Kenobi that he had fallen in love for Asajj Ventress, and she was killed at the end of the Clone Wars by Dooku. But because of her love, he was able to find himself back to the path. Obi-Wan realized that a Jedi's strength came from their attachment, their love, ambition, their friends, and family. He remembered how inappropriate Anakin was with it. If Anakin was taught properly to maintain those feelings without losing control, none of this would have ever happened. So, Obi-Wan began teaching the 3, then 4, about harboring attachments in a healthy way. This led Reva to become more interested in the history of the Order, because at one point in history, the Jedi weren't strict on having attachments. Even the Old Order, the most recent one that was wiped out by the Purge, allowed intimacy of some sorts. So, Kenobi was learning how to teach that to the children, both of which were missing their adopted parents. Obi-Wan would let the children interact with their parents via hologram. On Lothal, Obi-Wan was, by happenstance, able to stumble into Ezra Bridger, and discovered that he was highly Force-attuned. Bringing the boy with them on their journey, the 4 of them would visit Illum, a completely barren planet except for one ice Jedi temple. Inside of that Jedi temple, the students would face their most difficult task, trusting the Force to help them find their first lightsaber crystal. Luke, Leia, and Ezra would have to enter the temple and find their crystals. If they did, they could hold and have the power for their lightsabers in the future. Ezra had the hardest test to complete. Ezra had been trained the least out of the Jedi that Kenobi had as his students, so he was on the back foot, but he was ready to find his crystal. As for Reva, she had to use all the skills she'd acquired in the past year of travels to all the old planets of the Jedi and turn her crystal back. She had to revive the life of the crystal and make it that of a Jedi's. While Reva would sit quietly in the main room of the temple, Luke, Leia, and Ezra entered the caverns. Obi-Wan would feel a familiar presence after a couple minutes passed by. When Obi-Wan turned around, he saw someone he thought he lost when the Clone Wars ended. Obi-Wan turned around and opened his arms as he and Ahsoka hugged each other very tightly. Obi-Wan smiled at her as they asked each other how they were doing. Ahsoka was in the area and she felt the light. There was so much light radiating off of this group, especially with Obi-Wan being the bringer of hope to the galaxy present. Ahsoka had come to see what it was as she turned her head and saw Reva meditating. Ahsoka walked over and sat down next to Reva, who was a bit surprised to see her. Reva recognized Ahsoka. She was much older now and a full-grown adult with much longer tails. Ahsoka pulled out her lightsaber and took it apart with the Force as she showed Reva the clear crystal. Ahsoka told Reva that she needs to trust the Force, and she would be able to rid the darkness from her crystal. But first, she had to learn how to forgive herself for the past and move forward into the future. Obi-Wan smiled at Ahsoka. She had heard plenty about the legendary Obi-Wan Kenobi over the past 2 years. After his return to the path, people couldn't stop talking about him. He was the hero of this rebellion. The Empire feared him because he couldn't be traced. He always made troopers leave the military. Many of them changed their lives after seeing the kindness of the Jedi and realizing the cruelty of the Empire. While out in the Mid and Outer Rim, it was a lot easier to change the mind of stormtroopers. Towards the core, it would be harder. Troopers of the core were fiercely loyal to the Empire, because they grew up in the central point of power in the galaxy. Those from the Mid and Outer Rim had no such luxuries. Having near-death experiences with someone who spared everyone would change their perception of everything. With the added benefit of Imperial stormtroopers joining the ranks of change, former clones did as well. They saw the Empire was in the wrong. For the clones, it was mostly because they realized they played loyal to the wrong side. But when they weren't needed anymore, they were tossed aside like animals. The Jedi, at least the ones most of them knew, like General Shaak Ti, who spent so much time on Kamino, would have never thrown the clones away like the Empire did. Kenobi and Ahsoka would catch up on Illum, talking about changes as Obi-Wan told her that they could use her. Ahsoka had told Obi-Wan that she wasn't going to rejoin the Order. Her allegiances didn't match with that of the Order. Obi-Wan explained to her that the allegiances of the Code and the former Jedi Order didn't match up with the New Order. This new group of Jedi would be taught differently, and while Obi-Wan still wasn't the Grand Master, approved by Yoda, most of everyone anywhere referred to Obi-Wan as the Grand Master, being the last council member from the Old Order alive. Obi-Wan was seen as the redemption of the Jedi. Of course, to Ahsoka, this was a much more alluring offer, so she told Obi-Wan that she would join the ranks of the Order. Just as she said that, Luke came bolting out of the cave with a kyber crystal. He smiled. He was the first one done, but as he held the crystal, it melted in his hand. Obi-Wan smiled and patted Luke on the head, telling him to focus on the Force. It wasn't a race. Luke gritted his teeth as Reva looked up and told Luke that he could do it. He just had to keep trying. Luke smiled at Reva and then smiled at Obi-Wan and even at Ahsoka as he ran back into the cave. Ahsoka looked at Obi-Wan with her mouth wide open. Luke didn't need an introduction. Ahsoka knew he was a Skywalker. That was literally Anakin's son. Obi-Wan smiled as he told Ahsoka that there were 2 twins, Luke and Leia. Of course, there was their new friend that they found on Lothal by the name of Ezra. Ahsoka was absolutely amazed. Obi-Wan had been doing a lot of work. The truth was, he had. But for the past year or so, the 4 Jedi hadn't been around the path. Obi-Wan was trying to drag the Empire away from the path. They had been getting closer and closer, with the help of the Grand Inquisitor. He was following the trail of Kenobi, and so Kenobi led him to every single Jedi planet that he could, forcing the Grand Inquisitor to have to visit every single Jedi temple of the Order that he betrayed. This wasn't a challenge at first, but then it became increasingly more difficult for the Grand Inquisitor to stand seeing what had become of the Jedi Order. He was a former Jedi after all, and with most of the other Inquisitors, other than 1 or 2, leaving his side to rejoin the ranks of the Jedi, he was even questioning his loyalties. Obi-Wan waited patiently as he saw Ahsoka meditating on the floor. He waited for the 2 twins to return. As they waited, the oldest of the three walked out of the cave, looking as if he had seen a ghost, pale as the snow on the ground. Obi-Wan moved from his position and got beside the boy, asking what happened. Ezra told Obi-Wan that his parents were there. Though they weren't his parents, they were disfigured, and then they vanished as he got closer. Behind them was his crystal. Obi-Wan placed his hand on Ezra's shoulder, as he told them that the Force was telling him that his parents were gone, and that while they were gone, they would always be with him, protecting him from the blade as he carried it as a Jedi. Ezra looked up with tears falling from his eyes. The boy never wanted to let go of his parents or the idea that they might be gone, but they had been gone for 5 years. Ezra fell limp into Obi-Wan's arms as the Jedi Master hugged Ezra, using his calming presence to relax Ezra, though Obi-Wan's essence extended to Reva as she turned her crystal into a blue kyber crystal, seeing the beautiful crystal she brought back to life. A moment later, the twins ran out of the cave, pushing each other and laughing as they stood before Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. Ezra backed up as he wiped his face dry, as he, Luke, Leia, and Reva all stood before Obi-Wan in a semi-straight line. Obi-Wan expressed how proud of each and every single one of them he was. He told them all that it was time to return to Banab and return to the path. While Ahsoka was familiar with the path, she stayed away from it, because she was out doing her own missions and following her own journey. While she still was certainly skeptical of this new order, she did trust Obi-Wan, and so she followed the Jedi back to Banab, where they would arrive to find the city in a distraught position. The path had been blockaded, with an Imperial Star Destroyer sitting over the planet, and an Imperial army waiting outside the gates of the path. They demanded that Obi-Wan Kenobi come forward and be taken into custody, for the survival of the people inside, a trade for a trade. With Kenobi gone, it would be difficult, but Obi-Wan knew what he needed to do. He was, after all, the negotiator. Landing the ship on the far side of the city, he told Luke, Leia, and Ezra to stay behind and take the ship away to a hidden location on the far side of the planet until the invasion was beat back. Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and Reva would go to the location of the hidden base. The Empire tracked Kenobi, and when they realized the trail was going stale, they followed the path backwards and found themselves here on Banab. Obi-Wan told Ahsoka and Reva to lead the people to the secret outpost outside of the city, inside of a large mountain range. He would face down the Empire and give them time to escape. Ahsoka was worried about Obi-Wan, but the people inside didn't have time. Regardless of what Obi-Wan did, the Empire would come for him, and him alone. Of course, finding the path was important, but the small movement grew into something incredible with Obi-Wan's inspiration. Kenobi stepped in front of the city gates as Reva and Ahsoka emptied the people out of the back. Roken or Quinlan would have done it, but neither of them were currently on Banab. Quinlan was off-world on Coruscant, using his knowledge of the underbelly to open up a new way through to the path for those stuck under the rules of the Empire on Coruscant, while Roken, on the other hand, was on Lothal. He was sent there after Kenobi discovered Ezra. It was uncommon for all three to be off-world, but it was particularly bad timing. But, Kenobi showed up just in time. Obi-Wan stood before the AT-ATs as a Grand Inquisitor walked before the Imperial army. He was furious to see Kenobi, but at long last he tracked him down. 2 Inquisitors flanked the Grand Inquisitor as they stepped out in front of the army to face this Jedi Grand Master, as he was known. Their lightsabers ignited, the last 3 Inquisitors of the Inquisitorius, as they all moved towards Kenobi. Obi-Wan didn't budge. He got into his knees and closed his eyes. There were always alternatives to fighting. Obi-Wan never set out for victory in these situations, but as the people inside the city watched Obi-Wan, they saw that he sought to inspire hope. The Grand Inquisitor took the lead as he ran at Kenobi, followed by his 2 little minions. By this point, Obi-Wan had harmonized with the Force. Just as all the most powerful Jedi in the Order explained their relationship with the Force, Obi-Wan had it. Without opening his eyes, he waited. The Grand Inquisitor's blade swung forward. It was stopped inches away from Kenobi's face, as the blade and heat almost began trimming Kenobi's beard. Obi-Wan twisted his wrist and the Grand Inquisitor's blade flew from the connection, and it flew through the legs of one of the AT-ATs, knocking the towering walker over as it started a domino effect. The other 2 Inquisitors ran up as Kenobi pushed them away with his hands, throwing them both off balance as they both tumbled to their feet. Obi-Wan opened his eyes as the Grand Inquisitor took the blade away from Kenobi's belt, igniting it and swinging it at Obi-Wan, who moved back and forth, dodging the blade without moving offensively. Obi-Wan was replicating the basic Form 3 defensive moveset, just without holding a lightsaber. When he pushed the Grand Inquisitor back, he used the Force as his lightsaber popped out of the Grand Inquisitor's hands. Obi-Wan pulled his blade back, and put it on his belt and sheathed it. He looked at the Grand Inquisitor and called him by his real name. The Grand Inquisitor tumbled back. He hadn't been called that name since the fall of the Order, since he was once a Jedi Knight. Obi-Wan stood over him as he looked at both the Inquisitors, who were regaining their footing. Obi-Wan told the two of them that they were also once Jedi, asking why they would continue to serve evil. Their quest for power had gained them nothing. The Empire was in fear over a man who never even ignited his own lightsaber. As Obi-Wan gestured to the Imperial men leaving their walkers and running to the dropships trying to find a means to escape. The Grand Inquisitor looked over as he saw the frightened look on all their faces, and the faces of the two Inquisitors. While it would be years until a real galactic skill change would be able to be seen, the three of them knew it. Kenobi was right, and even if they didn't want to admit it, there was nothing for them to gain. Even if the Empire did fall, the power vacuum would vanish, as a new power, unified with the Jedi, would rise. The Grand Inquisitor looked back at Obi-Wan, who had his hand drawn. One of the two Inquisitors picked himself up and ran over with his blade ignited, as Obi-Wan continued to hold his hand out, not budging. The Grand Inquisitor pulled the blade of Kenobi out and clashed with the Inquisitor who tried to kill Kenobi. Obi-Wan looked at the two of them, the Inquisitor completely surprised by the Grand Inquisitor's decision to switch teams so quickly. But the truth was, it wasn't a quick switch. It had been brewing for months, since the Grand Inquisitor was tasked with hunting down Kenobi. Regardless, the entire city had been evacuated, and with Imperial men leaving the division immediately, with complete and total fear of the power of the Jedi, Obi-Wan looked over and pulled the blades from both the Grand Inquisitor and the one fighting with him. Obi-Wan spoke for the first time, telling the two of them, balance outweighs revenge, or even destitute. Obi-Wan told both of them before looking over at the last Inquisitor that what they wanted was not in revenge, but within harmony. They had to let go of what they had been taught by the Sith and the Empire. And then, without a moment's notice, shots rang down from the skies. Obi-Wan used the Force to throw the Inquisitors away from the blast as the city exploded, and Obi-Wan was sent flying out of the debris of the massive explosion. The Inquisitors thrown into the rubble, but away from the city's damage. The population had escaped, and the Imperial Star Destroyer pulled away, not waiting for any of the men who were still on the surface. Many of the men were disheartened that their empire would just abandon them. They watched as the Grand Inquisitor ran into the rubble, calling out for the name of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Many of the people who escaped the city ran back, not looking for the remnants of their home, but for the Jedi Grand Master. He faced down an entire army and saved every single soul without lifting a finger, and he was missing, gone in action. It was possible he was killed, but they all hoped for anything else. Not a single member of the battalion that was dispatched to the besieged city wasn't looking for Kenobi. Every single person left on the planet was searching for him, lifting up objects with the Force, working together. Everyone was trying to find him. The Grand Inquisitor had tears in his eyes. He felt redeemed. The second he claimed a redemption, it was all taken away from him by the Empire. They all frantically searched, up till about 40 minutes later. He was still awake, but he was holding pieces of debris up over himself, allowing it not to crush him to death. It was massive, so all the Force users combined used their strength to lift it off of him as they threw it away to the side. Obi-Wan then passed out on the ground, burned scars across his robes and on his skin. Obi-Wan was taken to a bacta tank where he would be dropped in immediately. People gathered around this bacta tank as Ahsoka told everyone to back up and pack their stuff and prepare to relocate. The central base of operations for the path on Banab was ruined, but the path would live on as Ahsoka took command in Obi-Wan's absence, trying to do what she knew he would do, and then remembered the kids. They were still on the other side of the planet, so she got in contact with them and demanded they come back to the city, or where it used to be. Within hours, they would be back, and they realized something was wrong. They could feel it in the Force. But the worried expression on the people's faces told them everything they needed to know. The three Inquisitors were trying to help the people, to do anything they could. For the one who tried to kill Kenobi, he changed his ways. The fact that Obi-Wan would still save him after he tried to kill him was heartwarming. The Inquisitor knew he was on the wrong path and decided to follow the Grand Inquisitor, even though if he stayed within the Empire, he would have been rewarded for his loyalty. When the kids returned, Luke, Leia, and Ezra would be heartbroken to see Obi-Wan floating around in a bacta tank. He wasn't present, he was in another world, a dream state, and inside of that dream, he was seeing memories of the past. And then the ghost of the future returned. Obi-Wan didn't know what it meant, but he was jarred awake after being out for several days. He looked around. Someone was monitoring him. It was the Jedi that he helped on one of the few planets during the great journey across the stars. The Jedi that was monitoring him was Kyle Katarn. He knew that much. Obi-Wan got out and placed his robes back on as he looked over and saw the people inside of the new location, a new base. Obi-Wan had no clue where they were. He hadn't seen it before. But the people relocated to Coruscant. It was a new operation that Quinlan had started on 1246. It was almost 1,000 levels lower than any of the closest Imperial patrols. And all the Emperor would know is that there was a growing light on his planet, hidden under all of his offices and hidden under the Empire. While no rebellion had this ability to turn the Empire back into a republic, there was a chance that if the Emperor fell, and the Outer and Mid-Rim flipped over to the rebellion, the core might change itself to reflect the greater good of the galaxy. The chances were slim, but it was still hopeful. Obi-Wan was taken down and cared for by Reva. She made sure he got everything he needed, while the kids kept him company while he recovered. From the crowd emerged an old friend, an even older friend than that of Master Vos. It was Master Yoda. There were dozens of Jedi surrounding Master Yoda, as he walked through the crowd and looked at his old friend. Yoda would ignite his blade, asking Kenobi to kneel. Obi-Wan would look down at the twins who would help him down to his knee, as Yoda gave the word pronouncing that Obi-Wan Kenobi would now become the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan smiled, but the job was not done yet. While Yoda was too old to try and help their cause, he would be a part of it, until he himself could no longer go. Obi-Wan was helped by the two younger Jedi, Kyle Katarn and Cal Kestis. Obi-Wan thanked the two of them as they guided him over to a command area. Quinlan had set up the location so that the Jedi could strike at the heart of power in the galaxy. While the people of Coruscant wouldn't revolt right now, the Jedi needed to wipe the Sith from existence. If they didn't, there would be no point in leading a rebellion against the Empire. Obi-Wan steadied himself and looked around at the exceptional talent surrounding him. Jedi Knights galore, Padawans, everyone showed up for this. It was for the galaxy, and of course they would. The times would change tonight. Obi-Wan looked back and forth, and he saw the Grand Inquisitor donning lighter robes. Reva stood behind Obi-Wan as Kyle and Cal stood next to each other, making a quick remark before Caleb Dune, also known as Kanan Jarrus, walked up next to the two, smacking one of them in the shoulder and fist-bumping the other two. Luke, Leia, and Ezra, which were essentially triplets at this point, ran up to the table and looked between the old and young. Ahsoka stood adjacent from Kenobi, with Quinlan leaning on her shoulder, as Obi-Wan looked down onto the holomap of the Jedi Temple. It had changed since the Emperor claimed it as his new throne room. But these blueprints were correct. If they were, then this way would be very simple. Obi-Wan looked around, informing the Jedi of what they would be doing. Obi-Wan then heard a growl, as a tall Wookiee warrior walked over behind Quinlan, and Ahsoka looking over at Obi-Wan. Kenobi rubbed his beard and smiled, as he detailed out a plan for them to follow. It would work to perfection. There were enough Jedi to take out the Emperor, but only the most skilled would go near him. That meant that Obi-Wan, Quinlan, Ahsoka, and the former Grand Inquisitor would be going to fight Sidious. The night fell on Coruscant as 20 Jedi made their way topside to the city, as they looked at the now Imperial Jedi Temple. The entire place of refuge for the Jedi had been torn to pieces. It was now shambles of the towering chamber of peace that the Jedi used to call home and dear to their own. Kenobi walked up as Gungi prepared by the entrance with Cal and Kyle to be a massive diversion. The former Inquisitors and Reva would travel with the main group and capture a girl by the name of the Emperor's Hand. She was being rumored to be Sidious's new apprentice, and she needed to be stopped before she became anything like her teacher. Obi-Wan took the remaining Jedi around. When all the Jedi were in their positions, Gungi called out a massive Wookiee howl that put the entire temple into high alert. The Jedi infiltrators moved in. The former Inquisitors and Reva moved in as they captured the Emperor's Hand. Gungi, Kyle, and the others ignited their lightsabers as they began to duel with the guards of the temple. Kenobi, Ahsoka, Quinlan, and the former Grand Inquisitor moved into the Emperor's residence as they all ignited their lightsabers, the Grand Inquisitor's still crimson, as he hadn't yet healed his. They all searched, and then Kenobi got them to stop as he felt the presence of the Dark Lord. He was using the cloud to cloud their vision. Sidious leaped down from the ceiling as Quinlan blocked Sidious's attack. Palpatine hadn't been in a fight since the fall of the Republic nearly 13 years before. He used his blade as he dove at Kenobi. The Jedi Master moved side to side as he swayed defensively. Sidious was not Vader. He would be offensive and patient. With 4 Jedi here, Sidious had to be vigilant in killing the weaker ones and then moving to the hardest. Obi-Wan was certainly the most skilled, being the one to rid the galaxy of the evil Darth Vader. Sidious attacked anywhere and everywhere he could, trying to land the open blow, as Ahsoka's white blade opened up the room from its darkness. Sidious moved back and forth. Palpatine dug his blade into the Grand Inquisitor's chest as he fell lifelessly to the ground. His redemption to not be forgotten, and his sacrifice of the galaxy to be remembered as long as the Jedi won this battle. Quinlan bounced back into attack position as Kenobi watched his friend push Sidious back. Ahsoka then moved in as she kicked at Sidious, only for Sidious at the same time to swing his blade back, cutting off Ahsoka's leg. Obi-Wan moved forward into Ahsoka's position as she fell to the ground in agony. Sidious poked back and forth as Obi-Wan changed into Form 4, moving forward as the two Jedi surrounded Sidious, pushing him back on him. For being an old man, he moved like a true Sith as he blocked every single lightsaber that came his way. Obi-Wan then saw Ahsoka from the corner of his eye, as she threw him one of her lightsabers. Obi-Wan pulled the blade and caught it, as he used both blades against Sidious, pushing back harder against the Dark Lord of the Sith. Sidious was almost defenseless as he tried to fight Quinlan and Obi-Wan. Sidious threw his blade forward, connecting with Quinlan's shoulder, as Obi-Wan and Quinlan's blade stuck at Palpatine's heart, killing the Sith Lord immediately. The Sith dropped to the floor lifelessly. Kenobi sheathed his weapon, as he made sure Quinlan was alright, as they both made their way to Ahsoka's aid. The guards throughout the temple were cleared by the rest of the Jedi, and the Emperor's hand, otherwise known as Mara Jade, was captured. Obi-Wan got himself under Ahsoka and helped her up, as the three of them looked down to see the Grand Inquisitor laying lifelessly. He was a true one. Even with the short period back on the light, he had returned, and that was what was important. For him, it wasn't a journey, rather it was a destination. He went through a long period of time where he was just in darkness, just like Anakin. But no matter what, it was time for the Jedi to return, fully. Their time being absent in the galaxy was over, and with the death of the Sith, they could achieve that. Of course, there would still be old wounds laying around across the galaxy, waiting for their time to strike, but at the moment, they weren't important. As the Jedi vanished into the night, the Empire in the following days would erupt into chaos. The Imperial Senate would have to find a way to fill a vacancy, and prominent opposing Senator Bail Organa would suggest a different outcome. Because the rebellion and pockets of rebels that weren't around weren't violent and spent most of their time successfully doing peaceful ops or humanitarian ops, they weren't regarded as terrorists by most of the public. Most of the mid to outer rim sided with these rebels and the Jedi. The legend of Obi-Wan Kenobi was still known throughout the galaxy. He was talked about by schooled children in the core and by the dirtiest scummy pirates out in the outer rim. But one pirate by the name of Honda Anaka was quite happy to hear that his old Jedi buddy was still sticking it to the baddies. The Jedi would return to caring for the galaxy, working in secrecy until months after the death of the Emperor. The Galactic Senate would repeal and turn over into a new republic, a galactic-scale decision that would require years of demilitarization. But it would require a band of leaders. Where leaders were not present, they arose. Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, and a handful of other senators from Lothal, Bothalai, and Mon Cala would join the ranks and would promote abolishing the No Jedi Act created in the final days of the Republic, repealing Order 66, making the Jedi free to roam the galaxy and help those in need. Luke and Leia, for the first time in 2 years, would be able to meet their parents and see them again, without endangering either of their lives, while showing them the crazy things that the tired old man from the desert showed them. As for the Jedi, they would relocate, not just to one somewhere, but anywhere. Obi-Wan, being the Grand Master, would begin a new academy for Jedi on Tython. This would be the home of the new Jedi Order. But instead of primarily focusing on this sect of the galaxy, Obi-Wan would send Jedi Knights Cal Kestis and Kyle Katarn out to the planet of Batuu to help recruiting Force sensitives to the Jedi. Batuu wouldn't be a central location, that would be on Tython, but the Jedi would spread out. Kenobi, having watched how the Order fell, would avoid attachments to the New Republic Senate, while he still kept his friend Bail Organa. As for the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, every Jedi that was ever killed, ever found still with their bodies intact, would be brought there. All the Jedi from the trophy room inside of Fortress Inquisitorius would be brought there, and the Jedi would burn their legendary temple to the ground, saying one goodbye to all of those who perished during the Purge, and during the reign of the Empire. While the Empire was being torn apart from the inside out, different sects would start their own regimes to challenge the will of the Galactic Senate. But no matter how good the strategist was, they wouldn't be able to put out the flame of hope and the fiery spirit of the formerly oppressed people of the galaxy. While the Jedi sought to reclaim the balance, they realized that they truly did, and the path became the way as people around the galaxy rose up in the flames of the Empire. For the Jedi, they had a bright future, Mara Jade, being the last chance of evil in the galaxy, would be personally trained by Grand Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, along with his class of several students, including Luke, Leia, Ezra, and Grogu, and a handful of others that would join him at his new Jedi Academy. They would grow in the ways of the Force and learn the true meaning of balance. Mara and Luke would find and kindle a young love for one another that would only blossom beautifully as they continued to grow together. Gungi, Ahsoka, Kanan, and Quinlan would be the first Jedi Masters to take up students in this new order. While Kanan had his Hera Syndulla, he of course was allowed to be part of this order. Reva, on the other hand, would trace her steps back to the cave of Jocasta Nu, and recover all the old holocrons and information of the Jedi's former archivist as she took up the mantle in her place. Yoda would stay his place with the Jedi, finding a newfound joy and love. He wished he'd discovered this centuries before, but at the end, Yoda would be able to enjoy the final years of his life with the pleasantries that he never got to experience before. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to George Story, Benjamin Wells, Jay Hoffman, Warpigman38, Icy Raptor, Gord, and Chancellor Lord Sanders for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this so we can see whatever video comes out next. I don't know what's going to be yet. We're going to find out. And if you want to see what if, let me know more. Let me know in the comments when I do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to be a part of the community. Support me out of the ways. And for the giveaway, I'll be changing the giveaway, so just get ready for the giveaway after tomorrow. We're doing a giveaway for 50,000 subscribers, so let's hit that subscribe button so we can hit 50K. We're on our way there. We're 20 away, so come on, let's do it. Let's go hard. Let's do it. Anyways, let's talk about our story here, because that's what we're here to talk about. Whew! I like this story. I do like this story. I really do. I didn't expect it to turn out this way. I really didn't. I'll be completely honest. This video should have been maybe 10 minutes long. It really shouldn't have been one of our PPSW movies. This is, I think this is actually one of my favorite stories. I took a little hiatus from writing for a little bit, and this was something really nice for me to come back into and write. So this felt really good for me personally to write. And I really enjoyed this, right? This was a fun story. This was enjoyable. It was great to see what we see. Now, obviously, I left some cliffhangers at the end. Obviously, Maul is still about, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about shadows. I'm using metaphors to explain Maul without directly saying his name, and that's intended. I mean, Maul, he's not a threat. He's really not. He's sitting on Malachor. He's going to sit on Malachor for the next 10 years doing nothing, and he probably will never be found again. That's just the case, you know. At the end of, I think it was right after Solo, like two years after, the Empire like goes and destroys Crimson Dawn, and he just goes to Malachor and he just sits there for like 8 years. So he's on Malachor doing nothing, and he's gonna just sit there doing nothing. So he's basically out of the picture. You know, maybe the Jedi find him, maybe they don't. But I didn't want to focus on that. When I started the story, I know people don't care for the Disney canon, and that's fine. To each their own, and that's how I feel about it. But I wanted to take advantage of the characters we were given. We were given great characters from the Kenobi show, and that's personally how I feel about it. I enjoyed the Kenobi show, and I enjoyed what I was able to give to you guys in this story. And I wanted to embolden and take advantage of what was written by the writing team at Disney. And I think I wanted to take advantage of Reva's character, because I really personally liked her character arc. And I was like, well, what else can we do with that? You know, what if she, so I added another what if to this, what if Reva wanted to be trained by Obi-Wan? So what if Reva was trained by Obi-Wan? And so we went from there, and we brought Reva along for the journey. And I know people are going to be, you know, whatever, but I don't care. I think Reva has this potential to be something more, and I think if she was trained by Obi-Wan, I think she could have become this incredible Jedi. And I don't think she's extremely Force attuned. I don't think she's like a powerful Jedi. I don't think she's a really powerful Jedi Knight. I don't think she's really up there. I mean, the Inquisitors are not strong Jedi. They're not that great. You know, there's 10,000 Jedi. They're like bottom 5,000. You know, they're not powerful Jedi. So, you know, I'm not assuming that she's powerful. But if she gets really interested in the archives, then I think having her become an archivist was kind of interesting. It takes her in a different path. It lets her kind of rekindle herself with the Jedi and really see what she can do with her life. Instead of just being a Jedi, she could be useful to the Order in her own unique way, right? And that's kind of what I want to do with that, in that direction, and for her in that direction. As for Ahsoka showing up in the story, and Ezra, Luke, and Leia, I originally was going to not have one of the twins come along. I decided to change my mind on that, and I realized that if you get Bail, not if you get Bail, if you get Owen to say yes, Bail's probably going to say yes. That's just how it works. I'm sure Bail would be like, yeah, you know, I kind of see where you're going with this, you know, let's do it. The convincing one is Owen. I think if Beru was like, look, we almost got killed by this woman last night. I think he should be trained by a Jedi. I think that would work. You know, I think Beru would be the level-headed individual. That's just how I think she is. She's always been kind of level-headed, and I think she would fill that role again here. I think she would just be like, yeah, no, I think he should be trained by a Jedi because did you remember last night? And from there, I mean, it's a 2-year time gap, so there's a 2-year time gap. I really didn't want Luke and Leia to bring balance to the Force. I'm kind of tired of that, so I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to be different. You know, I always wanted to be different. I always try to strive for something different, and I like including, you know, Kyle Katarn, Cal Kestis, Sarah Junda, Quinlan Vos. We got a whole bunch of characters here. It was Gungi. It was great. I mean, I love having these extra characters show up in this story because it adds to a wider dimension. Now, here's where I think some of you guys might get a little bit lost with this story, and it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, the legend of Obi-Wan Kenobi. In the Clone Wars, you have Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan. They were like poster boys, right? They were front billboard. They were, you know, you're driving down the street, and that's who you see on the billboard. It's not like, you know, if you're driving down the street, you see a billboard, that's who it is, right? Any billboard, it's them. They're the poster boys of the war. You know, the Jedi are here to save us, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker. They're recognizable names. They're names people in the Republic like. They're people that they're going to remember those names for years to come. So, if this one guy that was the poster boy comes back, and for example, and I kind of took a little bit from The Last Jedi here, I'm not going to lie, because I thought it was a cool idea. But the idea that a legend can come from a story. People talk through mouth, and that's just how we've always been as a society, and that's what stories are. And I think adding that elemental storytelling device into the story was kind of, I don't know, like breaking the fourth wall in a way, I don't know. But it was kind of fun for me because I was like, people are going to talk about this, right? I don't know what happened, you don't know what happened, but that was what the point was. The point was, I didn't want you to know what happened. I didn't want to know what happened. But the idea, the mythos behind this Jedi going with another Jedi and fighting off an entire army without hurting a single person is incredible, right? Of course you don't believe it. It's mythos. That's the whole point. It's not supposed to be, you know, accurate, 100% accurate. Maybe they killed one stormtrooper. You know, the one guy, the cannon fodder guy that, you know, was like, oh, you know, what if I shot the shot and it got deflected back into him? You know, that guy. You know, the clone that goes and punches the battle droid and that gets shot. You know, that guy. That's the type of guy that dies, right? But in all seriousness, I wanted the storytelling device that Obi-Wan Kenobi is this legendary Jedi, right? You have this guy in the beginning of the Kenobi show. I think it's Nari, and he goes up and he's like, "You're Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're the guy. You're that guy. You are the High Council guy, Obi-Wan Kenobi with the beard and the whole thing that says hello there all the time. It's your favorite thing to say. Like, that's him. You're him." And Obi-Wan's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not that guy." So if you take just that guy's reaction, and I kind of built off of that, and maybe I went a little exaggerated with it, but if you build off that actual reaction of the Jedi just being like, "Oh my goodness, you're Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are the guy that is Obi-Wan Kenobi. You are Mr. Hello there, the negotiator himself." People will lose their minds if he comes back, you know? People rallied around him during the Kenobi show, and I'm like, okay, well, let's take advantage of that. Let's take advantage of the little bit of stuff that we got during that time period. People want hope. He's their hope. So you build an image around him, and I kind of concocted this stew of Luke Skywalker from that little part in The Last Jedi where they're talking about this legendary Jedi that faced down the First Order, and I'm taking what we got from the Kenobi show where it's this Jedi Master, and they're all looking to him, they all look up to him. He's the Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they all looked up to him. And the idea that you would just see this Jedi Master, right? You see Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's training people. You know how inspirational that would be? When times get hard, people are going to look to anything for inspiration, and I think that would be Obi-Wan Kenobi, and that's the story. So I hope you all enjoyed. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.